Well, welcome everybody. Welcome. It's Monday, Thursday. It's the evening where we're looking at Via Transformativa with Matthew Fox's Creation Spirituality. And I believe that Tony is going to invite us into some time doing an overview of the elements and engaging with them again. So I'm, as always, glad to be with you and excited to see where our listening and our reflecting and our openness takes us with this very rich material. I just want to turn something off. So that you've gathered your desire for connection, your brokenheartedness for and with the world and the earth, you have gathered all these pieces and decided to be with others in the season of radical rearrangement. We're glad you're here. So let's take a moment, as we do each time, to see the other people who are gathered here this evening in this Zoom room. And we know that this space is made rich and meaningful by how we each show up fully present, both in our silence and our speaking, resisting, multitasking, sharing our faces, our eyes, smiles, and attention. And that all of those pieces are what create the energy and liveliness of this space. So let's just take some moments to say hello and to kind of see people. This is, in a way, perhaps this is our recreation of the passing of the peace, perhaps. Perhaps this is Zoom passing of the peace. We don't get to feel hand to hand or hugs. Yeah, we could be doing that too, right? We could actually pass the peace. That's lovely. Yes, so I think this is one of the ways we try to help give ourselves the sense of what it might be like to be more in proximity with each other. So we have this table here, a table of connectedness, of joy, grief, compassion, and surprising newness. This table is supported by the United Church of Canada nationally and locally by the Chinook Winds region of the United Church. Ralph Connor Memorial United Church is a core partner. Greg Woolley, minister at Ralph Connor, is one of our advisory committee, along with Tony Snow, who's the Indigenous lead for the Chinook Winds region, and Beth Lorimer with Kairos is another member of the advisory committee. So we come to this table from various places in Canada. I'm coming from the land of the prairies, foothills, and mountains in Calgary, the land of Chinooks and the Bow River, the land where Treaty 7 was made with the Blackfoot Confederacy, the Siksika Kainai Piikani peoples, the Tsuut'ina, the Stoney Nakoda nations, and the Métis Nation Region 3. So as I was preparing for our time this evening, and as I was remembering and noticing how much we've been using the table metaphor in our gatherings over the last 4 weeks, it seemed particularly poignant to me this evening because it is Maundy, Thursday, and each of us here has some affiliation, either loosely or strongly, with the Christian tradition. And so there's the familiarity with the story of Jesus meeting with his disciples, having a meal with his disciples and friends before the events of Good Friday and Easter Sunday take place. And on that occasion, we have the story of him washing the feet of his friends and his disciples. And that is such a rich story of layers of meaning and invitation and modeling. So as I was remembering that and thinking about it, it also caused me to reflect on the work that some of us have been doing on Mondays and Fridays using a method called, a contemplative method called Lectio Divina. So Lectio Divina is a process where the participants gather, they can gather individually, but often they gather in a group, and there is the reading of a text meditatively. So there's reading of a text with a contemplative attitude. And so we've been doing that, and we've been working through a number of passages that are part of the lectionary readings for Lent this year. And having done that, I've just been so struck by the theme of the body, the theme of bodies, hands, feet, actions of gathering, actions of hugging, actions of touching. So this whole kind of very physical, kind of tender, kind of body piece, and vulnerability in the stories. So I'm not going to go into a deep dive into all of the stories, but just to do a little kind of high view of them. The first passage that we looked at was the passage which describes Jesus' temptation. So there we have this introduction to Jesus in a very vulnerable place, hungry, having been in the desert, in the wild space, with wild creatures and wild weather perhaps, but hungry, engaged with something that's complicated and hard, and just kind of the fragility of that. And then later we hear that once he started on his mission, he's told that Herod's going to kill him. And he kind of says, yeah, right. Not here, he's not. That's only ever going to happen in Jerusalem. And then he goes into this beautiful passage about wanting to gather the people he can see like chicks. And there's this sense of compassion and tenderness and gentleness and feathers around other feathers, keeping people safe. Another beautiful, vulnerable, fragile description. Isaiah 55, 1-9. This passage blows your mind. It's this totally incredible passage where the listeners are invited to come, buy, eat the best food, get the best wine, and don't pay for it. That whole sense of just that goodness that we're receiving as human beings, and this grace and this abundance and this provision, this very physical provision. And yet it's just given to us without having to do anything or pay anything or cost anything. And we see that acted out. We see that acted out or made more real, more tangible in the story of the prodigal son, which is the passage that follows. And I just, when I was doing my Lectio Divina, I was just struck by how in the passage it talks about the father, when the son comes back, running towards his son, to hug him. And I just thought, this is serious love here. This is serious. I was thinking, in what context might I run towards my children, right? So just the sense of power and energy and compassion that was part of that. And in John 12, we have the story of Mary washing Jesus' feet. So there we have, again, this beautiful image of tenderness and attention and presence and extravagance about the physical body, her hands, her hair. She washed the perfume onto Jesus' feet with her hair, and Jesus received this amazing presence of her. And so we have all these lovely images of the body and touching and tenderness and compassion and beauty. And in Philippians, we're invited into emptying, into, again, a physical space, but a space that's now being emptied. When it talks about Jesus emptying himself, becoming like nothing, in order to kind of be part of the story that he was part of, a story of love. So all of those images were there for me as I started to think about our centering. We've developed a bit of a tradition of centering with our breath as we gather into this space. And so I was holding those images, the sense of the humanity, the sense of the fragility, the sense of the vulnerability, as I was thinking about our breath and our breathing as we gather. And so I'd like to share with you some words that kind of came together for me, reflecting some of these ideas and these themes. And I'll kind of lead us through a bit of a meditation with a focus on our breath. And then I'll give us a few moments to just be quiet. I'll stop talking because I actually, when I'm hanging out with people that are leading meditation and talk all the time, I sometimes get to the stage of saying, could you please be quiet now? I can't listen to you and meditate at the same time. So I will talk a little bit and then I will stop. So you have some time to just kind of be with what I've offered in whatever way works for you. And let's see what that little message is from. Oh, a message from Tony. Hi, Tony. I sent him a text asking him something.
I just saw your text. Yeah.
I know. I love it. So good. We can communicate on so many levels. So
back to focusing.
Back to focusing. I know. I don't think I'm ADHD or whatever, but sometimes I wonder. Okay. All right. So what I'd like you to do is to breathe. And as you breathe, I invite you just to think about relaxing. So as you breathe, with each breath, as you have the experience of letting go, I just invite you to feel your body just softening, settling, relaxing. Just breathe. And as you breathe out, just be aware of various muscles just releasing, softening. Maybe they're muscles around your face. Maybe they're muscles across the top of your scalp. Maybe the muscles in your belly. And as you breathe, I invite you to take all those wonderful, tender images that we've been recounting from the passages this Lent, those tender touchings. And just know the preciousness with which the human person is held. The vulnerability which is demonstrated, which is seen, the fragility, the compassion. So just breathe in the goodness of that and then relax. It is said that when Mary washed Jesus' feet, the perfume of the oil filled the room. So let the perfume of these beautiful vignettes, delivered in flesh and touch and compassion and longing and loss, enter you and allow you to sink into your own perfectly fragile humanness. And as you breathe out, like the Philippians passage suggests, breathe out all that you are holding on to, all the things you feel you need to be certain of, all the heartaches, all the fears, everything you're clinging to. Just have a sense of letting it go. And then breathe in again the fragrance of compassion in the company of vulnerability. The vulnerability of both the one washing the feet and the one whose feet are washed. Breathe in the complete okayness of who you are right now, this moment. Breathe in the okayness of your feet with all their fragility. And breathe out past stories and future fantasies. I just invite you to rest for a few minutes in this breathing in and this breathing out. As a gathering of the goodness of our quiet, I share this becoming familiar poem by Denise Levertov. The Avowal. As swimmers dare to lie face to the sky, and water bears them. As hawks rest upon air, and air sustains them. So would I learn to attain free fall and float into Creator Spirit's deep embrace, knowing no effort earns that all-surrounding grace. And now, as you're ready, I invite you to come back to this room, these people, and the further unfolding of our conversation together as we consider and sink into what we've been learning and enjoying and deepening around the four elements. And then as we look at the fourth pathway of creation spirituality, which is via Transformativa. So, Tony, lovely as always to have you here, and glad for you to welcome us as you do. I'm always so glad when you pray and to know that sage is burning, at least in your window, if not in mine. And so just glad you're here. Thank you.
Thank you. Could you share a screen or hosting for a second? So we'll just start as we do in our sessions with a prayer, just to begin this portion of our sharing. We do this to remember that there are other traditions and other ways that are helping us along. And so we offer this opening prayer as a tradition from my indigenous nation, the Stony Nation, and what we do on an ongoing basis to bring ourselves into balance. So let us pray. Creator, life giver, one who has many blessings for us in this world. We know that you are with us, guide us, support us, and nurture us throughout this life, through all our relationships, through all our trials, through those things that we go through. We give thanks for your presence, for the light that guides us each day in memory of our beginnings. Jesus Christ, Amen. And so, meditation. In this sharing, we have taken a look from an indigenous perspective on all these elements that we are bringing into focus as we work through this cycle. And this is the medicine wheel with the colors of my people, the Stony people, adhere to it. So you often hear different colors, but these are the ones that we use in our ceremony. And so we begin with that light of the world that enters on the east, and how that brings in illumination, information, and a dawning of who we are, that builds into the flourishing and the growth of the earth through that movement of the day and the highest point of that day being the pinnacle of the sun, moving into a time of night, and a time when we think about the winds that come from the west, that bring the storms, that bring the water, that bring the replenishment of the earth. And as we move through this cycle, we end with that coldness that we were just encountering today and into other days of the winter season, and how that plays into our cycle, understanding that it's not a cycle of bleakness, but it's a cycle of acceptance and understanding. As we talk about today, Monday, Thursday, and the Last Supper, the last times that we go through these, this part of the cycle, it's a repeating process. And so tomorrow we will uncover that next phase of that, which is the fulfillment of where we have been coming from in Lent into this time of where Christ enacts the ritual of Holy Week, into the crucifixion that happens, and then the result from that. And so it's a whole cycle of learning that we go through in this week. And I did a session earlier this week for the Lenten Series on this scripture, talking about the time when Christ delivers this message. And it says at the 9th hour, Christ, Creator, sets free Jesus, speaking in his own language, cried out with a voice, Eli, Eli, lema sabachthani, which means, "O great Spirit, my Creator, why have you left me alone?" And in this time to think through what this means for our understanding of not only Christ's journey, but ours, and that at these final moments, change and moving forward is often through our own will alone, and it is often something that we experience alone. And so this idea of being connected to that spirit in the larger message, this reconnection, is important in holding on to what we understand. So for the Indigenous people, for my people, the Stony people, when we die, we travel on a 4-day journey into the south, it's said, and that we travel to a campground where our ancestors will meet us. And along that way, we are to hear the songs of our people guiding us as we go. And so they give us instruction through those songs about how we are meant to live in this world. And this all brings us back to how we form our understanding of the world around us. And so when we think about this, and all I want you to do is just think about these words, maybe jot them down at some point, because we'll be looking at them again next week. So when we think about how we have moved through each one of these elements, what resounded to us in our thoughts about these times and about the connection that we are making to these different elements. And so if you had a word or thought, you could put them in the chat, or you could just hold on to them in your heart to think about what it means to have a practice of light, what it means to be in the light, and what it means to be associated with light. Similarly, when we think about the earth, in our second session, we talked about all those connections of the earth being this groundedness and centering around what we are meant to do in this land, and how we are meant to participate with all the other things of the earth. And so what does that mean to us to have a practice within the earth? In our practice of water, we talked about the life-givingness of water. We talked about the bounty and the mystery of water, and the interconnection of water that each drop is something that we all have experienced in our lifetime, and that is something in a closed cycle that we know and we are familiar with, and our bodies are familiar with as we travel in this world through this lifetime. And finally, the practice of air, the practice of spirit, the practice of how we are fulfilled by the air, but also in this time endangered by the air. So I'm just getting over a bout with COVID. First time I had it, and lost my sense of smell. So you couldn't really, that which was in the air could not be sensed. And so having gotten that sense back through very trials with a lot of essential oils and different things, to regain that sense of what the earth has to offer and not be blind to it, that's something that I think is really important to how we understand what air does within our world and our practice. In all these things, we are coordinating ourselves around a land-based practice of east, south, west, and north, and how these cardinal directions are assisted through these other measures of light, earth, water, and air, how we recognize these elements within that cycle and the cycles within each of them that occur. So as we move through this, it is on a singular plane, linear plane, that we see these elements enacted with us. For the individual indigenous people, our practice not only deals with those cardinal directions, but above and below. And so in these two areas, the heavens above, the stars, the cosmos, where we came from, we believe that we are star people. And the earth below is what grounds us, gives us our bodies, gives us our connection. When we die, we believe our bodies go to the earth and our spirit goes to the cosmos, the spirit goes to the heavens. And there's a rich understanding around how we are connected to all these things, and that we come together at a spiritual point in the center of this circle in order to understand the world around us and to use that as a grounding point for us to move forward in the world, because we always know where these elements are in our lives and how we connect to them. So we always belong to those areas. And that's why the earth is so important, especially when we have a deep connection to a particular place or a land mass, the way that we understand how that land is working in partnership with us. So that is what we'll think about as we move into next week, and maybe write down. So maybe you can start thinking about writing down some of those connections that you're making between these four elements. And so what does your relationship to the elements say about your connection to the earth? This is where we leave off. And thank you.
Sweet. I already started writing things, Tony. That was inspiring. So I look forward to making sure we have time next week to share kind of the invitation that Tony has given us to take the elements and really think about what is our practice of air, our practice of earth, our practice of water, our practice of light, to think about that and maybe come with some ideas about that, how you've noticed you maybe have a practice, or you see the beginnings of a practice around each of those elements. And I have some other things I would like to say, but I'm not going to say them because we'll have a time for sharing later, and then I can just share along with everybody else. But thank you, that was really rich. So the Via Transformativa is where we are today with Matthew Fox and his pathways of creation spirituality. So we've done the Via Positiva, which has been about the awe, the joy, the beauty, the knowing, the richness of the life world around us, all of the things that make us glad to be alive and sustain us. And the Via Negativa, which is around perhaps night, darkness, letting go, not clinging, not knowing, suffering, compassion, all of that part of the experience that we have, and that has been part of our Lenten journey. And last week we touched into Via Creativa, which is what happens when you bring the Via Positiva together with the Via Negativa, and they come together, and there's something new that gets birthed through the coming together of those two. And we started to talk about that with the beautiful poem by Mary Oliver and the story of Franz Marc and the blue horses, and just how that creativity is an expression of God in us and us in God, that God is fundamentally creative. How can we not believe that with the planet we're on and the universe we're part of? And we are part of that creativity. So those have been really rich themes. And I see Matthew Fox really wanting people to get that these are pillars. These are pillars of a spirituality that is life affirming, earth affirming, human affirming. And he's trying to help us have a different way of understanding than perhaps has been our traditional Christian background. If you go on his daily meditations website, he has a section there called Creation Spirituality, and it's very helpful because it has two columns, one where he puts kind of traditional, quote unquote, Christianity and creation spirituality, and he kind of contrasts them and compares them. And it's quite helpful. I mean, you might, they're probably fairly polarized in terms of how he's identifying it, but it is a helpful tool to see more clearly and concretely what he is offering into the conversation. So if you're interested in that, I would highly recommend checking that out on his website, the Daily Meditations website. So what I wanted to come to today was, there are, of course, many parts to the whole conversation about Via Transformativa, which is about themes of new creation. It's about themes of justice, themes of joy, themes of taking all of this, the positive, the negative, the creativity, and then responding with compassion as we are members of this earth community and as opportunities are part of our life, to respond with compassion and creativity. And so that's what the Via Negativa is. But I wanted to begin to explore a piece of the Via Negativa by sharing a particular story from my recent history. And so the story begins in 2019. So in 2019, I had a bit of a kind of awakening, a kind of a before and after kind of an experience. I mean, it wasn't like, Paul on the road to Damascus or anything quite that dramatic, but it was kind of a before and after moment. And it happened actually reading some articles in the Tai magazine, which comes out of BC. And they were about kind of how serious the situation was on the planet, and that things were going to get very bad. And that was the time when Greta Thunberg was doing all kinds of speaking and being a presence and an energy. And there were fires in, I think, California, maybe fires in Australia. I mean, it was kind of like, whoa, was kind of a, and I went from kind of being kind of closed off to that, to all of a sudden feeling very permeable and open. And my understanding was that about 14 years before, when I'd been working with Bill Phipps and Faith in the Common Good, I had part of the decision my family made to move to Prairie Sky, which is a co-housing co-op, was a response to kind of environmental issues, right? And so I kind of felt like we made this decision to move in from our bungalow in suburbia to a smaller townhouse, and that I was doing my thing for the planet. So don't call me, I'll call you. I have to, raise 2 kids, pay the rent, and I just can't deal with this right now. And it was almost like something happened and it's like, okay, now it's time, we're calling you. And so I started to write and I started to think, and I started to reach out to various folks within the United Church organization. And at that time was when Matthew Fox came to the Wisdom Center in Calgary to do a conference. And so I went to this conference, and in the course of the conference on the Saturday afternoon, I think there was a Q&A session. And so I got up and asked a question. And I said, well, Matthew, look, I said, there's all of us here, we're all really, intent on what you're saying, and we're being moved and inspired by it. And I said, what would you suggest that we should do? I said to him. And he said to me in the group, he said, you should keep, and I told him my story. I told him that I'd been kind of like not really engaged, and then had this kind of like permeability and was doing things. And he said, you should keep interfering. I'm like, what? He said, you should keep interfering. I'm like, okay, that's weird. So I kind of take that away, and I'm like, well, I don't actually really know exactly what that means, right? So then about 4 months later, I'm reading a book, which is a tribute to Joanna Macy, who is an amazing Buddhist environment leader. And Matthew Fox was doing a tribute to her. And so this is what he wrote. He says, another name for Joanna Macy is prophet. Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel defines the prophet as one who interferes, period. Joanna interferes. She interferes with injustice wherever it manifests itself, with sexism, with extractive capitalism, with racism. She interferes. So I come away from reading this paragraph and I go, oh my goodness, now what are we saying? So it was really striking to me. And I think part of what Matthew Fox says and is calling us to is that we are all invited through this journey of the 4 pathways, through the via positiva, via negativa, via creativa, and this final via transformativa. We are all invited to be mystics and prophets. We're all invited to be changed and transformed through our permeability, and to move into actions where we interfere. Hi, Greg. I bet you didn't know that was the calling, did you? That's what this girl is doing. Anyway, so it has been my journey so far to kind of take the next steps and see what might happen as we start to shift and transform how we engage with the Earth community. So I wanted to share that personal story. And then I had been going to invite Trevor to read a poem that he wrote and to talk about his experience of interfering, but he's not here today, so we won't be able to hear from him. But I also know that I would love to engage with Tony about this, because I am curious, Tony, if you'd be willing to chat with us a little bit about how this resonates with you, this definition of a prophet as interfering, and what your experience of that has been, how you've witnessed that, and how perhaps you see yourself participating as someone who is involved with interfering. So I'm just wondering if you'd be willing in your post-COVID state to engage with us around this conversation.
Sure.
Cool. Yeah, so what do you think of that definition as a prophet, as being someone who interferes?
I think the polite term is shit disturber. And I think that it is something that a lot of people are very passive, and a lot of people don't engage or are tentative about engaging in things, especially in the church. And I think that a lot of people defer to a leader, defer to somebody to kind of take the blame or take the brunt of what's going on, and kind of insulate themselves from any kind of risk. And I think that is, it takes us to a point. It helps us to sort of work collectively and in support of a goal or cause. But at a certain point, we have to inhabit that space. And that's what that intentional disrupting is about. So if we live in the moment of the status quo and do as we are told, that to me is always going back, and I've said this before, about people who live in the big castle, in the feudal lords graces, and operate by the will of those around them, versus when there is time of seeking justice or seeking to stand out for a particular cause or purpose. We don't have the conditioning in that scenario to stand on our own and to stand up. We have examples, Joan of Arc and others, who are all destroyed by it. We have examples of the disciples who went out after Christ was crucified, and then eventually all of them became slaughtered or murdered except for Peter. So this is the whole or John, the whole thing about the ways that we put ourselves behind what we are saying. And that to me is exactly what that's talking about, in terms of being able to lead from a position of strength, of knowing yourself, and strength of being guided by your heart, what you're called to, what you are intended to. And in that sense, it is around that idea of the prophetic one that stands out and kind of puts a stake in the ground and says, this is where we're going to begin. This is where we need to be, and kind of builds from there. And I think that is something that if we all did that, if we all had that sort of presence of mind to stand on our own and to make those changes and challenges, utilizing whatever power we have as a citizen, as a people of particular constituencies, there's always opportunity to do right and stand behind those words. Oftentimes we will let others take that because we know it may not turn out well, but I think that we need to live into that a bit more, especially as we come out of this difficult time. One of the things that I mentioned during the Lenten series was that I got COVID because I had to go do a service at the church. And it's that pressure of wanting to continue on with the way things have always been, rather than saying, okay, no, this is a dangerous time. This is a difficult time. We have issues around our health, issues around our environment that we need to take seriously. And if we are always deferring to our leaders at COP25, COP26, are we ever going to get anything done? And so those ones that stand up, put that stake in the ground like Greta, are the ones that are putting their necks on the line. But that's to awaken in us that same urgency and call.
Mm-hmm. So I'm curious, and this I know is probably a question that I'm probably, is a bigger conversation than we can probably have right now. but I'm just really struck that that the emerging story, the emerging story of the relationship between Indigenous communities and settlers and new folks in Canada, how that's been emerging over the last 50, 60 years positively has been because of people who've interfered, right? And people who continue to interfere in the status quo and say, actually, no, this is not okay.
Yeah.
And I mean,
that's, I think, a lot with the LGBTQ community as well, that there's a long time there where people were thrown out of houses and not talked to, and a lot of hurt feelings, and it takes that sort of almost a higher calling to say, okay, well, we were wrong, we can do something different and try to work in a different way that helps to heal.
mm-hmm. So thank you, Tony, for being willing to engage in this conversation impromptu. I would like to invite each of us now to just take some time, and I think we'll just stay in our group because we're not a large group. I think there will be time for us each to share. But I invite you to think about from the conversations and the themes that we've discussed so far this evening. Is there something that's resonating strongly with you? Something that's like, wow, yes, wow. Is there something that you feel resistant to, or like, I don't know, that's not going to fit for me very well? And is there something that you feel called to action, called to something new, some new step, some new possibility? So I invite you to reflect on whether it was the beginning with the reflections on vulnerability and fragility in our breathing, whether it was the beautiful reminder and invitation Tony gave us around the elements, or now in this conversation about via Transformativa and the prophet as someone who interferes, if there's pieces in that kind of particularly catch your attention. So yeah, I'd like to we'll kind of do this popcorn style. So if someone is kind of, got something bubbling on the pot, that would be great to hear from you. Well, I wish you all tomorrow. Tomorrow is a big day in our tradition. And I just, trust that God will be with you as you enter into that space of reflection. And in some ways, I think our conversation this evening is appropriate as we consider the costs and risks of interfering and all of what that opens up for us as questions and as mystery, and feels very appropriate. So I just trust that the Spirit will guide you in that reflection tomorrow, and will guide Greg as he guides everyone else. Yeah. So blessings, and also to Easter Sunday. Yeah. All right.
Thanks, Laura.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone.